Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is Matt Gayer, Co-Executive Director at the Catalog for Philanthropy. We're talking about board onboarding day and how to build engagement from the beginning with new board members. We're going to give everyone just another minute here to hop on, just one more minute, and we'll get started. Thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of y'all who just hopped on, my name is Matt Gayer, Co-Executive Director at the Catalog for Philanthropy. We'll be talking about board onboarding today and how to build engagement with new board members. A couple things to note before we begin. You should be able to see our screen right now with our slide, hear our audio. If you have issues with either today, let us know. We'll try to address those as quickly as we can. If you have any questions throughout the day, feel free to ask those at any time. We'll try to answer those questions as they come up or at the end of the webinar today. And we'll send out a copy of the slides and recording shortly afterwards. So we will send out a copy of the slides and recording shortly after the webinar today. Along with those slides and recording, we will also have a brief evaluation. It takes less than a minute. We'd really appreciate you all filling it out. So diving into this for board onboarding, this is one of the more important board management topics we'll talk about in any of our webinars. And why that is and why we say that is that board onboarding is really critical to the success of a new board member. When we think about staff onboarding, for instance, it's really hard if we think about hiring a staff person. If they're not engaged initially, it's hard to win them back, right? 6 months into employing someone, it's hard to then begin to really get them engaged. It's a lot easier to start off engaging them, have them step into a supportive environment, and then continue to thrive, right? This is the same for boards, same for volunteers, donors even. That initial first experience, right, is critical to how they're going to view their relationship with the organization, the service commitment they made, and the board overall. So when we think about board onboarding today, it's really touching on board member retention, engagement, board culture, which is a webinar we're going to be leading tomorrow. Really all that ties back in some ways to what we do in the first 6 to 12 months of having a new board member join the team. So we'll go into a few different specific tips today, but I just want to outline the process for board recruitment overall, right? What led us to this onboarding process? Because as much as we put a lot of weight on the board onboarding process, obviously the recruitment process that got us there is also critical. So doing recruitment based on what we need, right? So not just anyone that's willing to join the board, but doing skill-based recruitment, experience-based recruitment, right? Really getting specific people to join the board to fill in gaps in experience, skills, knowledge, identity, networks, etc. Reaching out to a broad swath of folks, having some type of interview evaluation process. And that part I will say is probably most critical as it relates to onboarding. If board prospects have gone through some type of evaluative process to be chosen for the board, they're going to enter into it very differently than if the conversation was, hey, we really need you, will you join? You're automatically in if you say yes, right? The power dynamic and relationship there, which is often the case in the nonprofit sector, is very different than if we said, hey, can you send us a resume, a statement of interest? We're going to talk to a couple of board members. We'd love to have you, but we obviously want the board to get to know you first. That just sets up a little bit more of an equal dynamic in the power there. After the evaluative interview, obviously the selection celebration, we want them to know we're excited to have them on. That's an honor to be part of the board. And then now we're to that onboarding piece, and that's what we'll spend our time today. But just thinking about the fact that as much as we're on onboarding today, do think back to your recruitment piece and how you're doing, especially that evaluate interview piece and the selection celebration piece, because those two really directly feed in to the onboarding process. So the first tip we have around board onboarding really starts at the beginning here, which is that last step of the recruitment process, right? The handoff transition between the two, which is an authentic welcome, right? We want to really make sure that as soon as they get selected, they don't feel like, hey, foregone conclusion, you're on the board, we'll send you some stuff later, right? We really want them to be excited by this, to feel engaged by this, relationally tied to the organization already. So the three big things we want to do there: we want to celebrate them joining, making sure they understand how excited we are about them, and try and get some other board members to reach out as well, even if we have to kind of encourage them to do so behind the scenes. Because we really don't want them to feel like just, me as the ED or the board chair really excited. We want them to know the board and the organization in general excited to have them involved. Secondly, we want to make sure we introduce them to the board so they can be celebrated in a group email, right? Even if we're meeting in person these days, we want to make sure we're virtually introducing them to everyone. It's a nice, easy way for them to get a lot of those kudos, welcome, etc. And if we are meeting virtually still, it's a good way to kind of move the conversation forward. And then finally, we want to build some time in at the next board meeting, right? So whatever meeting happens after they've been selected to join the board, for them to talk with other board members. So some type of social component. It could be ahead of the meeting. We see a lot of times boards now encourage folks, hey, join 15 minutes early. We'll be on there. If you just want to join to like kind of catch up, talk, etc., that'd be great. And then we'll get started at the actual time. So either having people come to a place early, join the Zoom early, either way, building in some type of social component so folks can start to get connected with each other. But big tips here on that welcome: want to make sure it's celebratory. It involves multiple people saying congrats and welcome, and it has a few different touch points. The second tip, and this is probably one of the more impactful ones we've seen work for boards, is introducing a board buddy program. A board buddy, board mentor, doesn't need to have a name necessarily, but some type of program for your board where existing board members help shepherd in and guide new board members that are joining. So the steps in this, right? We want to choose someone to help those new board members acclimate and engage. So thinking about who on our board maybe isn't in a leadership position per se, right? So they're not the chair or vice chair. They're not necessarily, have been on the board, longest, right? Or used to be chair. It could be any board member that's relatively engaged. We do want someone who's kind of actively engaged right now. And what they're going to do is serve as that mentor or buddy to help folks understand their role as a board member, right? To check in with them a little bit, to facilitate their initial experience, and help them just feel more comfortable. So some of the things that's going to include, it's important to let that board buddy know they don't need to know every answer that new board member has, right? They're there to facilitate. They're there that if the board new member has a question for senior staff, right, for board leadership, they don't have to ask it themselves. They could go through the buddy, right, or the buddy could introduce them to someone. So they have someone else to talk to, right, that isn't necessarily senior leadership of the board and the organization. The buddy's going to check in with them a few times. This is going to get less and less formal as time goes on. Early on, the chair or ED will introduce buddy to new board member. They'll do an initial check-in. They'll meet right before the first board meeting. They'll meet after the first board meeting to see how it went. And then monthly for the first 3 to 6 months, right? Depending on when the board meeting was and how the new board member is kind of doing. After 6 months, that just becomes kind of a friendly face, right? That the new board member knows on the board. They don't necessarily need formal check-ins anymore. But a lot of times we see this really helps them develop a one-on-one connection with someone, especially if a board member is joining and they're the only new board member joining. They don't have others in their kind of cohort coming on. This board buddy can be a really important kind of lifeline and connection for them. And then finally, it's important to emphasize that mentor buddy. This is really a relational role, right? There are some tactical elements. There's some, hoping to answer questions, right? Make sure they have resources, etc. But it really is just about making people feel welcome and making people feel like they have a connection on the board right from the beginning, right? And not like they have to be there for several years where they kind of get connected socially. And just letting someone was asking in the questions, we will send out the slides and recording shortly afterwards. So you will receive the copy of the slides and recording shortly after the webinar today. So this board buddy program, we do see this as a great way to both engage new members, excuse me, but also engage existing members, right? We can imagine that for those folks who have maybe stepped into leadership yet on the board, this can be a great stepping stone. It's been a great way for them to see themselves as a more senior board member. So it can be a great way to engage existing folks in addition to having a pipeline for new folks to kind of get involved. The third tip here is around the board handbook itself, right? I think often we talk to organizations that feel like putting their board handbook together for new members is a little bit like the whole, cutting down a tree in the forest. If no one sees it, did it fall? If you make a board handbook and no one opens it, did you ever make it, right? Something we hear often from organizations. So the big thing we see go wrong here with the handbook is usually either an organizational issue. So we'll talk about how to structure it here in a second, or it includes way too much, right? It's a 60-page handbook, and that is daunting. That's overwhelming. Board members are ultimately volunteers. This is a new board member, right, who is only so engaged so far with the organization. So we don't want to overwhelm them with the whole kitchen sink. So what we want to include in there, pretty straightforward. In terms of past information, if we put together, and we only need to update this every couple of years, if we put together like a one-page organizational history, it could be a visual timeline, but something to help them understand, like, look, we started here, now we're here, and here's like the big things that happen along the way, right? ED transitions, major program launches, major sponsorships or corporate partnerships, big challenges for the organization, etc. The last strategic plan that we had, so not the current one, but the one before, the last 2 years of financial documents. So if we have 990 or an audit, we have internal financial documents. Don't need to include a lot there, but at least the statement of activity, audit, or 990 for the last 2 years. And any other important milestone documents. Again, we want to keep this smaller than larger, but if there's other key things we think we need to share, we definitely could include. We want to think about what current information, right? So the minutes from the last 2 meetings. When they join the next meeting, right, they'll see the minutes from the prior where we're voting to approve them, but sending the minutes from the last 2 meetings so they understand kind of what the conversations have been lately. The past 2 months of financials, so when they look at next month's financials at the meeting, they have a sense of where we've been financially. The current budget v. actual, right, the current budget, current strat plan or annual goals if we have one or the other, current org chart for staff, one-page program summary, something we don't update very often, but something to have, and then a board roster that includes contact info, right? So you can get in touch with folks. And the goal for this, and what we really need to make sure we're making clear to new board members, is that you don't have to read all of this. So highlight a handful of things within this list you think are really important for them to look at. They should at least look at the current budget, depending on where you are in the year, the budget v. actual, the org chart and board roster, and then probably the organizational history. Those are the things they really should, at the very minimum, and the strategic plan, take a look at. Other stuff would be great if they do, but if they don't, it's fine. And letting them know kind of where to prioritize. You're not going to be tested on it, but we want this as background so you can jump in as a fully engaged member at the first meeting instead of spending 6 to 12 months trying to catch up, right? And that's really how the handbook should be phrased to them. We see a lot better engagement when it's phrased like that. If it's phrased as like something you have to do to go to the first meeting, it becomes homework and people get a lot less excited by it. The fourth tip, and this is probably the one we see folks actively avoid the most, but we really encourage, is thinking about getting people involved with committees early. So a lot of times organizations are slow to involve new board members on committees because they don't want to overwhelm them. They don't want to give them too many meetings, too much work right off the bat. We kind of see the opposite is true. And again, if you think back to the staff analogy here of onboarding, it makes a lot of sense. If someone starts a new job, if you started a new job, and there wasn't much work for you to do the first kind of month or two, you start kind of not taking it that seriously, right? You're not that engaged. In your mind, this isn't a job you have to work very hard at. It's a pretty slow-paced environment. Then if all of a sudden you're asked to do a lot, it's a big shift. And often you're not kind of ready for that, prepared for that, or kind of open to that. Same for board members. So a lot of times we try to kind of protect them the first 6 months, make sure they don't have a lot on their plate. But then by the time we go to ask them stuff, they've set an expectation in their mind that, oh, this is a board that I'm on, but I don't really have to do very much for. Then all of a sudden we kind of change the rules 6 to 12 months later. So instead, we want to hit the ground running there a little bit and not give them too much. We don't want to overwhelm, but at least getting them involved in a committee early. So they should attend their first board meeting before joining a committee, but then post first board meeting, have them join a committee, have them get involved on that committee. So how to make sure those committees are effective, right, when they join, because that's the other side of that. If we're going to put new board members on a committee, we want to make sure the committee is doing good work. We want to make sure all of our committees have a committee charter to set out the roles and responsibilities. We have examples of this in templates, so if you need one, feel free to email us. We're happy to share. But this is just a one-page document that kind of sets out why the committee was founded, what the key responsibilities are, how often they're going to meet, just kind of what the goal, structure, and kind of workflow of the committee is. We want to make sure that after attending their first board meeting, we're reaching out and having them choose that committee, right? So ideally, at our board meeting, committees are reporting out, committees are kind of actively engaged. So we want to make sure that we're sharing that with them and they feel actively engaged as well. We want to make sure that in that committee that they're giving a meaningful task, right? So committees, again, really are where a lot of the board work gets done. So involving them in committee is a chance to get them involved in that work, right? So making sure we talk to the committee chair about how do we get that new kind of board member that's going to be there involved in even something small, right? Doing a little research, looking up something, talking to someone about something, taking notes at a meeting, whatever it might be, but giving them something meaningful and bite-sized to kind of get the ball rolling in terms of their board service. Want to encourage our committee chairs that during their meetings, it's not just about getting work done, it's also about building relationships. Even if we're on a board of just kind of 10 to 12, that's already a lot of folks that meet at once, virtually or in person. So committees a lot of times are where we see a lot of group building and relationship building happen. They usually have 3 to 5 people. It's a small group. It's a little easier to connect with each other. So really encouraging some relationship development and kind of team building on those committees, that's going to help those new board members feel like not just part of that committee, but also part of the board overall, really feel connected to each other. We want to make sure that committees feel significant at the board meetings, both the first one the new board members are at, and then at subsequent board meetings that their committee is participating in. So we make sure committees are owning part of the agenda. Every committee we have should be owning at least some small piece of the agenda, even if it's just a quick report out, only a couple minute update at the beginning of the meeting, making sure that it feels like their work and their focus is kind of top of mind and priority for the organization. And then finally, this should be part of the check-in process. When we're talking to new board members about their board experience, we should also specifically be asking about their committee experience as well. This is something that their buddy should be asking them about, the chair should be asking about, and the ED should as well. And the final tip here is just to really build out a full 12-month plan. So when we think about the whole 12 months across the board members' first year, what are the different stages we're going to do? What things can we leverage to really build their engagement and get them started in the right way? So again, as we talked about right away, the first thing we want to do is celebrate their inclusion, make some initial introductions, and our whole goal in that first kind of week or two that they're on the board is make them feel connected, make them feel like things are easy and organized, and make them feel celebrated, right? We are excited to have you here. We can't wait to see what you do. Those 3 things together, right? And especially, we can focus a lot on the celebrated, connected piece. We also do want to make sure that we're sending that board book quickly. We're sending them some calendar invites. All that's going to help them feel confident in the organization, the structure, the logistics, and take that out as a worry, right? The next thing we're going to do across the first couple of months, we're going to have them attend their first board meeting in most cases. Depending on when they join, this might be 3 months later. If you have quarterly meetings, and it's just kind of bad timing. But most time, first couple of months, they attend a board meeting. Directly after that, they attend a committee meeting. They're also doing kind of a handful of board buddy check-ins there. So getting introduced within the first couple of weeks to their board buddy, and then that board buddy is there to kind of help them across the first couple of months. Across the next kind of 3 to 6 months, right? So the first half year, the rest of the time, if we haven't already done it, we want them to fill out their board commitment form, which is going to highlight both their kind of financial giving, but also is going to highlight the ways they want to contribute, get involved, and the commitments and expectations they're willing to do. And then we also want to get them involved in some meaningful work, right? So in the first 6 months, I want them to have some task, and it could be just making an introduction, doing a little bit of research. It doesn't have to be anything big, but something meaningful so they feel like they're contributing. The second half of that first year, we're going to phase out the board buddy formal relationship. The informal, they can still totally connect, and we encourage that, but the formal relationship ends. At least quarterly during the time, so maybe at the 9-month and 12-month, the chair or ED should be checking with them. And then about 1 year in, checking in about how the first year went and talking about potential future leadership roles. They don't necessarily need to jump into something right away. We want to make sure that's on the radar so they're not just a board member, but really become a board leader. Someone asked in the questions already about this, and probably overall, who should be leading this onboarding process, the chair or the ED? In an ideal world, right, in a kind of perfect structure, the board governance chair and or board chair are going to be leading this onboarding process. But we know for many organizations that struggle with board engagement, the ED is a little more actively involved, and that's completely fine. The goal of getting new board members in and onboarding them correctly is that we're making a move towards that engaged board that we want. So we don't feel like we have that now. This is going to be a little bit more work on the ED's plate. Hopefully we have a couple board members to be able to involve in that board buddy role at the very least. But ideally speaking, this should largely sit with the chair or governance chair, and then the ED is just helping provide information as needed. With that, I'll just talk about a couple of quick next steps and answer some questions that have come in, and any other questions you all have, feel free to ask. The first thing to do here, we want to set 1 to 3 goals for what we want to update about our onboarding. So obviously a lot of things we could do. So what are 1 to 3 specific things we want to do differently in our board onboarding moving forward? 2, want to make sure we get those, excuse me, those new board members a commitment form to fill out. 3, we want to make sure the ED chair and the board buddy are touching base, right? So all these folks talking to the new board members are also talking to each other. Want to make sure all our committees have those updated charters to make it easier for new members to know where they want to join. We want to use breakout rooms to drive some personal conversations, right? Or breakout spaces. So if we're doing it virtually, breakout rooms. If we're in person, splitting people into small groups. But those small group conversations at board meetings can be really powerful to build connection there. And then making sure that across the welcoming process, a real strong sense of gratitude is coming, especially from the executive director and the staff, right? Ultimately, board are volunteers. We want them to know that we really appreciate their time, commitment, and energy as they step into this role. So with that, I'll take questions that folks have. Someone was asking about how to form a committee. If we're bringing on a new committee, should we involve new board members? A new committee or existing committee, both are great options for board members. Forming those committees, you're either going to form a standing or ad hoc committee, right? So a committee that lasts forever or lasts for a specific period of time, and the board's going to vote to form that committee. So as they vote, they should be voting to approve a committee charter and launch a committee. Then that charter can be really helpful for involving new board members in it. Someone else is asking, our current board class wasn't really properly welcomed. Is there any way to kind of make up for it, right? Can we go back and onboard those who haven't been onboarded? The answer is definitely yes. You know, it will be a little more challenging right? And also there will be a little more limitations to it. But just like, again, going back to the staff idea, if we hired staff and didn't really engage them initially, we're not just going to give up on the staff, right? We're going to re-engage. Same for those board members. So for those board members we think that maybe weren't properly welcomed, I would send them an updated board book with the materials saying, hey, I know you've been on the board for a bit, but not sure if you've seen all these things. Thought it might be helpful context. Please let me know if you have any questions. The board buddy program be a little harder to implement without being pretty obvious. You're kind of saying, hey, this is onboarding 2.0, but you could definitely connect them with some more senior board members as part of just saying like, hey, we want to get more board members having one-on-one conversations outside of meetings. So thought you would really benefit from talking to X, Y, or Z person, and setting up those conversations could be a good replacement for the buddy program. Then I think the big thing we really see is getting folks plugged into a committee or something to do some meaningful work. Ultimately, board members joined in 9 out of 10 cases because they wanted to make a difference. So give them something to impact. That often also drives that connection as well. Any other questions folks have before we wrap up today? And we just have a couple minutes left. All right, great. Well, thank you all for joining. If you have other questions, feel free to reach out and have a good rest of your day.